of all, I thank AIOS as well as ARC for inviting us on this platform to put forward our. And I'd like to introduce my co-instructors, Dr. Sanjay Kumar Mishra. He's from Army Hospital RNR. Dr. Anirudh Singh, he's presently in a forward location in Northern India. I can't disclose the location. It's classified. Then we have Dr. Amit Sethi from Ashwini Hospital in Mumbai. And Dr. Vijay Kumar Sharma, he is presently at Calcutta. These are my co-instructors. So we'll just start our presentation.
Nikhil, please mute yourself. Nikhil, please mute yourself.
Okay, the IC which we are going to present today is basically how we approach ocular trauma in a setting of multi-organ trauma in armed forces, and what are the standard operating procedures we have devised to minimize the long-term effects of trauma in our serving soldiers. So we are living in a country which is a diverse country. Its extent is huge, and the topography is varied. If you can see, we have hillocks, we have large valleys, and we have areas which are dry desert, areas which are snow-capped. We have mountain bed, river beds. We have high altitude areas beyond 9,000 feet, more towards the north and northeast of a country. We have jungles towards the northeast, and we have snow-capped mountains which are bounding our upper area extending from Pakistan, Afghanistan to China. And we have
Sandeep?
Yes, sir.
Sandeep can't hear.
Is it not audible?
I could hear it loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay. So if we see the central part of a country, heartland has got multiple waterways, rivers which ebb and their water levels increase and decrease depending on the situation. And again, casualty evacuation, this area basically based on boats, and very difficult to take away this thing, the casualties from one place to another. Then we have a large area of coastline. Now coastline, again, areas of coastline is again has to be manned, and casualty evacuation in these areas is also difficult. So once we see the topography, we realize how difficult it is for us to manage our casualties. So for armed forces, we have the area of responsibility which covers the areas covered by Army, Air Force, and Navy, and for which we have a tri-service called Armed Forces Medical Services. Now we should all remember that a serving soldier or an officer is an investment by Indian government, which is very crucial, very expensive. So our aim is to bring back all these injured people back to service as far as possible. Rehabilitation, management, and rapid recovery is very important. So because of that, we have devised some protocols. Now, if you see, our area of responsibility is in the high altitude area in the north and northeast, which is manned by infantry soldiers as well as Indo-Tibetan border force. Then we have large coastline open seas, which is again manned by Navy and Coast Guard. We have northeast mountains, thick jungles, which are manned by again our infantry soldiers as well as our Seema Suraksha Bal and Assam Rifles. Now we have towards the northwest, we have deserts, which are manned by mechanized forces and our BSF. And then we have a large airspace manned by strategic location of Air Force at various places. Now see, after you see the extent, you realize why we have a problem. So the topography is very varied. There is no single solution for management, treatment, and evacuation of casualties. So we have to modify as the topography varies. Then most of these areas are far-flung. So casualty evacuation is very difficult. It is hampered by the roads. It is hampered by the weather. And so many times you have to manage the casualties locally, which in civil, probably we don't need to do that. Then we have a very limited medical manpower over such a huge area. So we have to judicially use them. Then we have a large vulnerable clientele. Now this clientele is open to kinds of injuries which are normally not seen in civil settings. So these kind of injuries you really see. You never see improvised explosive devices, very less you see. The kind of injuries which include thermochemical injuries, the projectiles, again very rarely seen outside. So these are the challenges for us. Then most of our clientele is prone to terrain and weather specific trauma. Like in high altitude area, we can have frostbites, high altitude related illnesses. Then in Navy, we can have decompression illnesses, decompression sickness. Then the incidence of head trauma is very high in our settings. And we get optic nerve injuries and we get Turson syndrome, very, very common. So these all have to be kept in mind when we plan our management protocols. So what are the solutions in such a scenario? So most important solution here is to have a standardized protocol for management of trauma so that we are never caught off guard. So these are the 4 pillars of our standard operating procedures. One is echelon-based medical support system. Second is training, which is probably one of the most important thing. Extensive use of telemedicine and robust casualty evacuation system, which these 4 pillars have really helped us in managing our patients. So if you see echelon-based medical support system means every step, the management and the manpower is different. So at the periphery, at the extreme periphery, the management is basically life and limb supported. So accordingly, the management remains as tourniquets or clotting agents and just a first aid. Then as the level of management goes down, the complexity of surgeries increase, going on to tertiary care centers where multi-specialty management is done. So the idea is to have a current route from surgery to definitive care already defined, which we already have in most of our scenarios. Now this, if you see, we take care of the fact of platinum 10 minutes and golden 1 hour for life and limb saving. So this is the first hour management. Then after following that, we have 12 to 24 hours window for ocular injuries. So most of the ocular injuries are managed within 12 to 24 hours in our scenario by whatever means possible. And going backwards. And another thing we have done in armed forces is having surgical capabilities as far ahead as possible. Maybe not at this level, but most of the other levels have some amount of surgical capabilities as we'll discuss later on. So the most peripheral posts have people who are basically the infantry soldiers. They are trained in basic life support and they are known as battlefield nursing assistants or BFNAs. Then in some posts, we have nursing assistants, and extreme posts where evacuation is not difficult, we have medical officers who are trained in both basic life support and advanced life support scenarios. And the equipment what they have is usually sat phones for telecommunication and basic first aid in most of the scenarios. Following this peripheral post, we have the next is static border hospitals or mobile surgical units, where surgical teams are available, and few scenarios like in northern sector and northeast sectors where chances of trauma are very high, we have ophthalmologists also. So these have surgical capabilities either in the form of container-based surgical OTs as shown here, or we have dug-in OTs in forward locations. So this is the second level of support system in our evacuation chain. Then we have zonal hospitals, which are usually static, and most of them are at the locations where the trauma is at the highest. So this is one location at Srinagar where we have a full complement of surgical teams, ophthalmologists, and subspecialties like maxillofacial support and neurosurgeons. Whereas most of these zonal hospitals, they have surgical teams, they are static, and they have ophthalmologists. The final support system is at the tertiary care centers, which is located in all zones, and they are basically planned on the lines of casualty evacuation. As in the northern sector, we have a command hospital in Udhampur, then we have a command hospital in Chandi Mandir. Same in northeast sectors, we have a command hospital, which is tertiary care center in Kolkata. And then we have other centers like AFMC, Army Hospital, RNR. We have Command Hospital Air Force. Then we have INS Ashwini, which is this is a naval and Air Force hospitals. So these centers, either complex casualties are directly evacuated there, or they are after stabilization they are referred there. And these centers are the places where all subspecialties are available. So we should remember, whenever we have a eye trauma, we should never forget most of these patients, if they are in high impact trauma zone or a road traffic accident, they can have multi-organ trauma also. So all our care providers are trained in few things, which is again very important for everybody. See, with the first responders, they should always secure the area where the trauma has occurred, because so many times the primary trauma is less than the secondary injuries, which happens because of secondary blasts, which can happen because of fire, which can happen because of debris falling out of these areas where injuries occur. So this is first important thing. Second thing is, whenever we see an eye injury, we jump onto the eye. Wherever we should always remember, the first priority is life and limb saving. So these protocols of A, B, C, D, E are most important, and they are ingrained in all our first responders. They are management of airway, breathing, circulation, and disability evaluation, and then exposure of the injured area so that you don't miss out injuries. This is again important to ingrain. Then next thing is always secure spine on spinal stretchers, and don't move any patients of multi-organ trauma, especially before movement, without securing the spine. So this is important. Most of the first responders, they are trained to evaluate eye injuries, and wherever we have ophthalmologists or medical officers, they are trained to see for basic visual acuity, RAPD, and recognize the signs of open globe. And whenever they suspect an open globe, before transfer, eye shields are given in transferring all these patients. All these patients get some tetanus toxoid, they get broad spectrum antibiotics, and they get topical antibiotics before they are moved to further centers. So this training is repeated at the time of their enrollment into army, and every year there is a repeat course for these trainings, especially for nursing assistants and the battlefield nursing assistants, which are the infantry soldiers which are deployed in the far-flung areas. And medical officers, they have training in BLS and ELS every year. So this is a very important aspect of our evacuation chain and injury management. Then the use of telemedicine is very, very good in armed forces. We have secure networks which are service specific. Army, Air Force, Navy have got their own secure networks. We don't know about it because they are classified. And actually speaking, if you ask me, the maximum bandwidth is available in India is with armed forces only. Wherever high-speed internets are available, we use that. And in peripheries, we have satellite phones which are used for telecommunication and telemedicine. So use of things like this handheld fundus camera is very, very rampant. Most of our peripheral hospitals, even without ophthalmologists, have this. And they're trained to use this to find out about fundus injuries. And again, even handheld phones are used for sending photographs and consultation. And a simple internet connection on a phone or a laptop over a 3G or 2G connection can also help in telemedicine. And this is being used extensively in armed forces. Another part is casualty evacuation. So wherever required, the casualty evacuations can be done on foot or improvisation, as in high altitude area or road heads are available, then ambulances are used. The one thing which we are using extensively is helicopters or air evacuations. So areas like this in high altitude area where other evacuations not possible, we are using small helicopters. The advantages are rapid evacuation, disadvantages are they are non-pressurized. Second thing is very few casualties can go into this small helicopters. So you can have two sitting and one lying casualty. So most of these helicopters have been converted or say improvised to carry more casualties also. Navy Air Force is better off because they got bigger helicopters and they can take out casualties from ships and again far-flung areas very fast. Naval evacuation will be talked by Sergeant Commander Captain Amit Sethi later on. But again, evacuation out of ships is only way out is probably helicopters only. So this is improvisation which we have done. This is a PTU or patient transport unit where the patient has got a monitor, a ventilator, and everything on a PTU only, which is shifted in the larger aircraft. So we are now using larger aircraft for more casualty evacuation where larger number of casualties at a larger distance can be used. So Globemaster airplane is a very, very helpful thing which has helped us in evacuation of casualties very fast. Even with ambulances in situ, it's a huge aircraft. So this is again one more thing which we are using. What happens when the patient reach tertiary care centers? So most of these patients have multi-organ traumas. So EUA is must, with a multi-specialty team of ophthalmologists, orthopedic surgeons, neurosurgeon, maxillofacial surgeons. So when we see our traumas, most of our traumas are there with maxillofacial trauma, and a combined effort is needed by ophthalmologists and maxillofacial surgeons, which we have in most of our zonal and tertiary care centers. And the floor and the roof can be repaired by them with our help. Head injuries, again, important to note that eye findings are very common in head injuries. Pupil, cranial nerve, muscle paralysis, and Turson syndrome. Again, these things are very, very common. We can have innocuous ecchymosis around the lids. They point us towards skull-based fractures. Again, those things have to be kept in mind at tertiary care center. Thing to remember is whenever we have a trauma, we should never forget that other organ systems can also be involved apart from eye. Head injuries, again, decompression of optic nerve can be done with the help of neurosurgeons. So what is important is to remember that you should anticipate what kind of trauma you're getting, assess your area of responsibilities, take a stock of your manpower and medical resources, and accordingly calibrate your response. So whatever you have, use it judiciously and plan evacuation routes. So if you have already everything planned, the response will be better. That is why having a standard operating procedure in place like armed forces is very, very important in management of all these traumas. So the most important thing in the end is to remember is every second invested in training saves a life, limb, or a eye. So this is important. This is the most important take home message for all the first responders and the secondary responders in the chain of evacuation. This we should remember. So this is all I have. I will now invite Dr. Anil. The next presentation, which is management of orbital and industrial trauma and trauma specific to Air Force warriors. Thank you. Dr. Anil.
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Without wasting much time, I'll start with the presentation. And the topic of my presentation is management of orbital and adnexal trauma, and especially trauma which is peculiar to Air Force warriors. So, starting with my presentation, as in any trauma patient, what the speaker said, that the most important part is that one should evaluate the patient as per the advanced trauma life support system, where you evaluate for any serious injury to any vital organ. That is the most important. And after that, you come to the examination of the ocular status. And when you are examining the ocular as well as the orbital status, you rule out first the acute problem like a severe ocular injury, orbital hemorrhage, or optic nerve trauma, and then you move on to periocular evaluation. So when we talk about orbital trauma, it is not just the trauma to the facial bones, it is also trauma involving the adjacent soft tissues, injuries to orbital contents, and more sinister intracranial structures and paranasal sinuses. So when we start with the external examination, we see whether there is any exophthalmos or not. So in case there is any exophthalmos, we see whether there is a pulsation or pulsation. So if there is pulsation, it is possibly a orbital hemorrhage or emphysema. But if there is a pulsation, we think in terms of a high flow CCF or a orbital roof fracture with secondary herniation. So that is the thing. Now, in case you have a rhinorrhea, you may have a obviously orbital roof or a base of skull fracture. But subcutaneous emphysema or bony stripping can be present in any orbital fracture. Also, in case you have numbness, then we think more in terms of a nerve entrapment with the orbital fracture. Now, bony orbital trauma may be simple or maybe complex when there is involvement of facial fracture or skull fracture. And when we talk about the soft tissue injuries, there can be eyelid or lacrimal apparatus injury, orbital hemorrhage, or intraorbital foreign body. So when we talk about facial fractures, we can't forget the Lee-Fort, the famous Lee-Fort mid-facial fractures, where we have the Lee-Fort 1, 2, and 3. Now, the common thing with all these three is that they all involve the pterygoid plates. Particularly, now you can see in this particular slide, Lee-Fort 2 and 3 are the ones which involve the orbital valves. Any fracture near the orbital apex can injure the optic nerve with the stretching, tearing, twisting, or bruising of the fixed canalicular portion. Whereas orbital roof fractures are generally seen when you have any blunt trauma or missile injuries, which may be peculiar in any armed forces scenario. Now, in orbital roof fractures, in particular, you have epistaxis, rhinorrhea, anosmia, restricted upgaze and ptosis, depression of supraorbital rim, and hyperesthesia, cranial nerve V1, hypothalamus and pulsatile. as we all know, the famous dictum, orbital flows blow out and roofs blow in. Not all orbital fractures are operated. It is only fractures which have a depressed skull fracture or diplopia, exophthalmos, or frontal sinus fracture. Now, in medial orbital fractures or naso-orbital ethmoidal fractures, they generally occur because of face striking solid surfaces, which may be there in cases of armed forces scenario more often. And these cases generally involve the frontal process of maxilla, lacrimal bone, ethmoid bone, and they lead to a depressed bridge of the nose and traumatic telecanthus. Now, common symptoms in medial orbital fractures could be horizontal diplopia, orbital emphysema, orbital hemorrhage, anophthalmos, or damage to the lacrimal drainage system. And it generally leads to a lateral displacement of medial canthus. Indication for surgery in naso-orbital ethmoidal fracture is this in itself is an indication, because all these fractures which generally involve medial orbital wall, we generally go into surgical intervention. Now we come to the orbital floor fracture, which is generally the most common, and it is located in the middle location. There could be a vertical diplopia, there could be a OCR or oculocardiac reflex, and generally anophthalmos. Now we see this particular photograph. Why I put this is because this particular photograph is very important to all of us. This basically photograph shows a Hurricane fighter jet which flew in the 1940s, and particularly so in the Battle of Britain, which was fought in 1940. And there was a very important event which happened. Flight Lieutenant Gordon Cleaver was flying when the enemy fire hit his canopy. And those times the canopy, which you can see now in this second photograph, which I have just shown for comparison, when the enemy hit the perspex canopy, the canopy was shattered and the pieces went into the eyes of the pilot, Flight Lieutenant Gordon Cleaver. At the time, the RAF ophthalmologist, the Royal Air Force ophthalmologist, was Harold Ridley, and he examined Gordon Cleaver subsequently over many months, and he noticed that this perspex, which was embedded within the eyes of this particular fighter pilot, didn't cause any reaction. So he conceptualized that in case intraocular lens could be made out of that particular canopy, that same material, which was basically perspex, it could possibly lead to a better eyesight. And this lens or IOL was made by the Rayner company, and as we all know, it was history, and that is why we remember this particular event. Now, just to understand why these events happen more in Air Force warriors, I'd like to just show you a small video as to how the ejection happens. So when the bullet ejects in cases of any misfortune event in the aircraft or in enemy fire, you can see first the canopy shatters off, and when the canopy shatters off, the pieces just fly off, and then subsequently as you can see, the fighter pilot ejects off out of the aircraft. So injuries which can happen during the aircraft ejection are related basically one to the canopy which bursts off, so it can cause burns to the face cuts, but it can also lead to intraocular foreign body or intraorbital foreign body, because these pieces fly off with a lot of force. And besides that, obviously they can cause injuries to extremities, they can cause spinal injuries also. Just to show you, a scan of a fighter pilot who had ejected out around a year and a half back, and we had seen him, and that time, as you can see, in one particular slide, you can see all the event, particular misfortune event. There were spinal injuries, there were pieces which stuck onto the face of the fighter pilot, and as you can see on the top right corner, there is a intraocular foreign body, there is an intraorbital foreign body. So these are all the events which can actually happen in a little unfortunate ejection event. So ocular injuries that happen during ejection are basically facial and lead burns. They could be subconjunctival hemorrhage, retinal hemorrhage, or a vitreous hemorrhage. You can have coronal foreign bodies which are not so sinister, but in addition, obviously you can have a intraocular also, and intraorbital foreign body, and these foreign bodies may traverse between the globe. They can also traverse through the globe, double perforation of the globe. Now this is just to show you that photograph of how these multiple foreign bodies, which were basically pieces of that canopy, they shattered and it went into the orbit as well as into the eyeball. So the basic dilemma with these kind of foreign bodies is whether you should remove them. Obviously, if it's intraocular, your main attempt is to remove it. But if it's like we are mainly discussing the intraorbital foreign bodies, so we generally go in for a removal of these intraorbital foreign bodies if it is made of copper, iron, zinc, steel, nickel, aluminium, mercury, or lead. But generally, in case it's an inert foreign body, like if it's a gold, silver, platinum, glass, acrylic, carbon, plastic, rubber, then in those cases we may even plan to observe such foreign bodies, especially so if they are having a little smooth edge and they are more posterior in the orbit. So in a nutshell, I'd like to specify that these kind of injuries are generally more common in Air Force warriors, and subsequent speakers would be focusing more on different kind of injuries seen more commonly in Armed Forces warriors. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anirudh. It was a lovely presentation. We'll just continue with our presentations and have discussion in the end. So I'll like to invite Dr. Vijay Kumar Sharma for the next talk, which is Management of Corneoscleral Trauma and High Altitude Related Injuries. Vijay, please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So I'll be discussing management of corneoscleral trauma and high altitude related diseases, starting with the high altitude ones. High altitude can affect the eye in different ways. There are various factors. One of these factors include the low atmosphere and hypoxia, the cold and dry environment, very high UV exposure, and hyperviscosity state of the circulation. Now, it can lead to various diseases. The problems due to cold environment include snow blindness, also known as photoophthalmia, dry eyes, recurrent corneal erosions. The problems due to low atmospheric pressure and hypoxia can be high altitude retinopathy, high altitude ocular motility disorders, and corneal edema. Problems due to in individuals who have some past ocular or medical issues, like post-refractive surgery status or glaucoma or retinal surgery with intraocular gas. So these problems can get exaggerated and it can lead to many issues. When an individual goes to high altitude area, and especially a low lander, when there is a rapid ascent to high altitude, the corneal edema can occur. Although this type of edema is reversible, the various refractive surgeries can also impair the individual's visual acuity when he goes to high altitude area. Especially the post-RK patients, they get a hyperopic shift of 3 to 4 diopters when they reach a high altitude area or extreme high altitude area. There is a very famous, there is a case report about the two mountaineers who were climbing the Mount Everest, and one of them had undergone RK. So when this RK individuals, he reached at 22,000 feet, his vision started getting blurred. And with every say 100 feet ascent after that, his vision started getting worse. The reason for this is in post-RK patients, in the RK incisions, they swell up, and that causes flattening of central part of cornea, which lead to hyperopic shift. And mountaineer had a tough time. He had to abandon the further ascent, and he barely survived on his descent because of his blurred vision. So especially post-RK patients can have very bad blurring of vision and should avoid going to high altitude area. This is although not seen in post-LASIK or post-SMILE patients. Intraocular pressure also varies with a high altitude. There is a transient increase in intraocular pressure on ascent to altitude of 5,200 meters by third day. And although over a period of time, by about 7 days, it returns back to normal. So glaucoma patients should be careful. The cause for this is probably raised episcleral venous pressure. Similarly, the other diseases such as high altitude retinopathy, vascular occlusions, and AION, these can also occur at the high altitude. Now, going to management of corneoscleral lacerations. The corneoscleral lacerations can be divided based on the corneal thickness involvement into lamellar and full thickness lacerations, and based on complexity into simple corneal laceration where there is no tissue loss and no involvement of other parts of the eye, whereas the complex laceration where there is a significant tissue loss and there is involvement of other ocular tissues. It has been classified by ocular trauma classification group into various types. we have to assess the history, and clinical evaluation has to be done very carefully in all these patients. We should note the date, time, and location of the injury, and the history of object which has caused trauma. We should also evaluate the individual for risk of any microbial contamination. General examination is very important. It's important to rule out any life-threatening diseases. Visual acuity assessment at the presentation is a prognostic factor. Presence of RAPD give a poor prognosis. Now, this is very important to assess the visual acuity. This is one patient who had a bilateral stab injuries in both eyes. There were around 47 times she was stabbed in both the eyes. And when she presented to us, it was looking like a hopeless situation. One of our residents who attended her at the first time, he noted that she had some perception of light in her left eye. And then the patient was taken for a surgery at 7 p.m. in the evening. It was a combined surgery by corneal surgeon, vitreoretinal surgeon, oculoplasty surgeon, and squint surgeon, along with a reconstructive surgical team. It took about 12 hours. And you can see the image of the patient. That is after about 3 months, the individual regained vision from just perception of light to 6/36 in left eye. The right eye had no vision. So this difference can arise, especially if a visual acuity assessment is done at the time of presentation. The extent and depth of laceration, including involvement of limbus, sclera, iris, vitreous, all this should be assessed. There are signs of some occult corneal scleral laceration, which should be looked for if a laceration is not visible directly. These include the chemosis or a subconjunctival hemorrhage, if there is a uveal or a vitreous prolapse, or there may be irregular anterior chamber. All these may point towards some corneal scleral laceration. Investigation should be tailor-made according to the case, but I think minimum X-ray is must because it has got some medical legal value. As far as the management is concerned, the goals include restoring optically clear, smooth curvature of the restoration of normal anatomical relationship, and prevention of any complications. Now we have to identify the anatomical landmarks, which include the limbus, the sharp angles, the stellate edges, and the posterior margin of the scleral laceration. It's very important. When we start the suturing, the peripheral part of the cornea can be sutured using a long, tighter, and a closer sutures, whereas in the central visual axis, we should suture short. Suture should be shorter, wider, and slightly loose. When a laceration is a perpendicular laceration, the suture can be equally divided in the distance on the anterior aspect of the laceration. But when it's a beveled laceration, we should center the suture around posterior aspect rather than the anterior aspect, so that there is no gaping of the wound. This is a case of corneal laceration. There was vitreous prolapse through this corneal laceration. So for the vitreous tags, they were removed. Subsequently, the various edges of the laceration was identified. It was a S-shaped laceration. So the angles were identified, and first sutures were applied at those angles so that the alignment of tissue is maintained. There is no misalignment of tissues. And these sutures are smaller, slightly wider, and also slightly loose. So this is how a corneal laceration should be repaired. This is a scleral laceration starting from the limbus posteriorly. Now, first of all, you should decontaminate the wound. Here, these are the eyelashes which are there in the laceration impacted. Then conjunctiva and tenon are removed. It's very important to identify the posterior aspect of a scleral laceration. Sometimes the posterior aspect goes beyond the muscle. So in those cases, you may require to disinsert the muscle, repair the scleral laceration, and then reinsert the muscle. Now here the first suture is given at the limbus. After the iris is reposited carefully, one should be very careful. Before finishing the surgery, again, we make a side port in such cases where there is an iris prolapse. And after inserting the viscoelastic, then we release that iris tissue. Iris tissue is released and air bubble is put. So this is a scleral lacerations. Many times, it may be a combined effort by a corneal surgeon or a vitreoretinal surgeon together, especially if there is endophthalmitis or other retinal, maybe retinal detachment, or like in this case where a silicone oil was put at the time of initial laceration. So in those cases, we can use a temporary keratoprosthesis that will make the work of a vitreoretinal surgeon easier. Visibility is much better, and once the retinal surgery gets completed, then a corneal transplant can be done after removing the temporary K-probe. Lamellar laceration should be managed. If it is an undisplaced flap, you can simply reposit it and put a BCL, it will heal. If it is a displaced flap, you reposit the flap and you may require to suture it. This is one interesting case, an individual who had lamellar corneal laceration, as you can see in the ASOCT, in the down below. The laceration, there was an epithelial hypertrophy here. Epithelial hypertrophy was there, and in this case, after removing this epithelial hypertrophic epithelium, then we fashioned a smile lenticule, which was cut in same fashion as the laceration was. That was placed, and then a BCL was placed. So it covered this notch, which otherwise could have acted as a nidus for infection subsequently. So lamellar affect the visual acuity, and there are some surgical options. Like in this case, there are. I request audiovisual to give 1 minute extra, please.
Yeah, you can continue.
Okay. So this individual who had the healed corneal laceration, and it was in the periphery, the visual axis was clear. The iris tissue was lost. It was only around 1/3 of iris tissue which was left. So we couldn't have sutured the iris tissue. Cosmetic contact lenses were not fitting. Patient was not ready for that. And so in this case, we used these iris segments. We had to use 2 iris segments to cover the entire defect of the iris. And this resulted in this final picture. You can see the first photograph and the last photograph. In the first photograph, the opacity is coming in the center of the visual axis, which is causing irregular refraction, and visual acuity was just 5/60. And the last one, when after putting these iris segments, the visual axis became clear. All that irregular refraction is gone, and the individual visual acuity improved to 6/18. This is my last slide. Sometimes you get iris issues in such cases. Like in this case, there is a iridodialysis post trauma. So these can be managed by using various techniques. One important technique that I want to mention here is a single pass 4-throw technique. Now in this, this can be used in cases of traumatic mydriasis. So 10-0 needle is straight, Prolene needle is passed, and then between the first part of the suture and the last part of the first part of the suture is pulled from inside the eye, and 4 throws are given, and then both the sides are pulled out, and it results in the it takes care of this traumatic mydriasis very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vijay, for a lovely lucid presentation. I'll request Dr. Amit Sethi to do the next presentation. Amit, you there?
Amit is not there.
Yeah, Amit is there. He's already sharing. Amit, are you there?
Amit sir is mute, I think. Unmute kar le, please.
Just give me a second.
Yeah. Can you hello?
We can hear you, sir.
Yeah. Once.
See your screens. Yes.
Can you see the slide?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon. My co-speakers have talked about injuries specific to Army and Air Force and also high altitude. Now, I would be talking about ocular injuries and trauma specific to the Navy and more specifically to the Indian naval warships. Ocular trauma has been an unavoidable hazard of industrialization with the advent of machines in today's world. Now, ocular trauma is very common on board Indian naval warships. The reason, because a unique work environment, restriction of space, and the equipments that individuals deal with in an Indian naval ship. Now, let's take a walk in the environment in the ship and a submarine. Now, this is a picture where you see the personnel stay inside the ship. There's hardly any space between the bunks. And for an individual to navigate from one corner to another corner is difficult. The space in a submarine is even lesser. You can see the space, how people work in a restricted, confined environment. Personnel in a submarine have to move around and work within the torpedo tubes. Movement on a ship is not like any other natural area as people move around. It is through stairs. People have to go from one deck to another deck with stairs. So there is increased incidence of tripping, falling, slipping. So more chances, increased chances of ocular trauma, blunt trauma. Wait a second. Now, the equipments that the people deal with. You deal with guns, missiles, rockets. So there is increased incidence of burn injuries, electrocution in the personnels. Now, activities which are specific to the Navy. Now, here is a picture which shows an aircraft carrier. Now, the individuals who are working on the flight deck have an increased risk of trauma due to high velocity particles on the deck hitting their eye when a high speed aircraft lands or takes off. There is risk when individuals work on the various equipments. Now, injury specific to Navy is that the personnel have to deal with the ropes, high tension ropes. These ropes are used in submarines and ships to secure the ships alongside. And these ropes are also used for personnel to get transferred from one ship to another ship, which is called an activity called jackstick. These high tension ropes easily snap off and they can cause serious trauma to the individuals. Activities in a submarine. Escape drills in a submarine are routinely done. This is a submariner. He is escaping from a submarine into a pressurized bell. It has been seen that these individuals very commonly get subconjunctival hemorrhages. Now, a case scenario of ocular injuries on board ships. Now, a person sustained electrical burn trauma to 20% of the body while working on an engine room. He was evacuated to a tertiary care naval hospital where he was found to have an electrical traumatic cataract. Once the patient was stabilized, he was taken up for surgery. In a couple of months, phacoemulsification and IOL implant was done, and patient has had good visual recovery. In another case, a person while working on the flight deck was hit by a sharp object. Examination revealed a penetrating corneal injury with an iron nail. He was managed conservatively in the ship initially and then evacuated with an eye shield. The nail was removed, cornea sutured, and the cataract surgery was done, and an IOL was implanted at a later date. You can see the nail stuck to the cornea, causing a corneal penetrating injury, and the post-op pictures. In another case, while securing the rope, there was a blunt trauma to the eye. Patient had severe hyphema, traumatic mydriasis. Fundus showed a commotion. He had angle recession and ultimately ended up developing angle recession glaucoma, and the patient is on follow-ups.
Another case very commonly seen in the ships and submarines is battery blast injuries. Now, this individual had a chemical injury. Batteries generally have sulfuric acid. He came with corneal opacity, limbal ischemia, and a scleral melt. He was managed conservatively, and now he's doing all fine. Now, individuals, once they have an injury, are initially taken to the medical inspection room, which is called the sick bay, which is specific to the ship. Here they are stabilized, given the basic first aid, and then evacuated. Evacuation from the ship is through the flight deck. They are either evacuated with helicopters from the ship to a nearby naval hospital, or they can be evacuated by a boat or transferred from one ship to another ship. Trauma classification has already been discussed by my previous co-speaker. There's also an ocular trauma scoring. Scoring on the basis of various raw points are given on the basis of visual acuity, nature of injury, and presence or absence of ROP. This helps to categorize, predict the potential visual acuity outcomes. Now, management of traumatic cataract. Cataract in a penetrating trauma is because of the breach of the anterior capsule, which leads to hydration of the cortical fibers, either causing a focal or a total cataract. In a blunt trauma, it is a rosette-shaped cataract, which are stellate-shaped posterior axial opacities. Now, presentation pattern in traumatic cataracts. In a blunt trauma with no capsular defect, it would be a rosette-shaped cataract. In a case of penetrating injury, when there is a breach in the anterior capsule, the cataract would be either a flocculent lens matter coming into the AC, or it might be confined to the bag. It could be combined with anterior and posterior capsular rupture. In case of a blunt trauma, there could be a posterior capsular rupture with a nucleus drop. Now, various considerations of management in a traumatic cataract. Most important, timing of cataract surgery, when to operate, modification in the steps while operating. We should be sensitized towards the intraoperative problems and the post-op rehabilitation. Like if there is a traumatic cataract in a blunt trauma, like as you see a rosette-shaped cataract, with the capsule and the zonules intact, it can be treated as a normal cataract, and we can go in for a phacoemulsification surgery or an SICS. Primary repair only when there is a big defect. For example, in this picture, you see a corneal laceration from 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, to 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And in this case, it was of paramount importance to maintain globe integrity. So first the corneal suturing was done, and afterward, at a later date, once the corneal edema resolved, the uveitis resolved, a cataract surgery was taken up. In a case scenario when we have to go in for a primary repair and cataract surgery in the same sitting, is you have a capsular breach, cortical matter in the AC, there is an endothelial touch, we need to remove the cataract with the cortical wash. And most important is that we should not manipulate the capsular frills. Some key points for the surgery: capsulorhexis, always stay in the capsule, use retroillumination, look for capsular tears, use forceps. The zonular integrity needs to be checked. If there is zonular weakness or dehiscence for about 3 to 4 clock hours, go in for a CTR. If it's more than that, a Sionese ring to be used. Addressing the cataract, if the bag is not stable, initiate the cataract surgery using iris or capsular hooks. If it's a soft cataract in a purely traumatic cataract, we can go in with irrigation aspiration, either use a bimanual cannula or a Simcoe's irrigation aspiration cannula. If there is a senile component, we need to go in for a phaco or SICS. Surgical parameters should be low when operating a traumatic cataract. IOL implantation can be in the bag, sulcus. If there is absence of capsular support, we can go in for SFIOL, either a glued or a suture fixated IOL. a video of a traumatic cataract. This happened in a person who was working on the flight deck. He was hit by a sharp nail and caused a corneal laceration with rupture of the anterior capsule, which led to a cataract. So initially the nail was removed. The corneal laceration was sutured, and the anterior capsule was stained by trypan blue, and then the cortical material was removed by a Simcoe irrigation IA cannula. The incisions were sutured with 10-0 nylon, and the patient is doing well. The angles can also be injured in case of traumatic cataract. In case of trauma, 60% of the eyes with non-penetrating or concussive trauma will develop angle recession. It is strongly associated with traumatic hyphema. If there is more than 180 degree of recession, they are at high risk of developing glaucoma. Management in angle recession glaucoma is medical. Surgical, we can go in for a filtering surgery or tubes, but there is high risk of failure of the surgery. So to sum it up, causes of injury, as I brought out, is because of slipping, falling, equipment-related, inadequate training, fire and electrical injuries. Precautions that we need to take is protective goggles, protective face shields and helmets. All these protective gears are used by the personnel. There are standard operative procedures how to handle various equipments. The first aid is paramount for medical officers on the ship. They need to follow ABC for eye injuries. Always check the visual acuity. The best examination for both eyes is to be done. Contiguous structures where the injury has taken place in the eye to be checked. These, that is the drugs, as has been brought out by my co-speakers. They can give antibiotics, painkillers, and tetanus whenever required in case of open globe injuries. And do not put pressure bandage on the eye. Evacuate the patient with eye shields. And patients are given a period of convalescence when after having been treated at the Naval Hospital, and they are monitored in a sheltered appointment till they are ready to perform. Thank you.
Thank you, Amit. Now I invite my last speaker, Dr. Sanjay Mishra. Sir, you are ready, sir?
1 second, I just.
Yeah.
One second, just a second. Yeah. Can you see?
Sure, share your screen, sir.
Share a screen,
You,
sir.
but not screens.
1 second, 1 second. I can see my. 1 second.
So there is a green.
Yeah, I've seen that. Can you see that now?
No, it's still not there.
Now it's getting just.
You have to. It's there in 1 second. Share.
After sharing screen, you will get your desktop view, sir. And just click on the presentation.
Sandeep, I have sent you this. Can you share this thing? It's not.
Not coming, sir.
Huh?
Sir, once you start that window, that share screen, you'll get a desktop view. Click on that. Once you click, then only then it will share. You click on the share screen.
My
Have you
screen is
opened
open now. That day I showed you. So screen is on desktop view. Huh?
Yeah. Have you opened your PPT, sir?
Yeah, my PPT is open.
Your PPT is open. Share your share the screen.
Yeah, share screen.
Now you see your desktop view. Click on that.
Yeah. Yeah. You got it, huh?
No, still not.
Not yet, sir. You have to share
Not yet.
again. After seeing the desktop, there is a share button again, sir, on that.
Yeah. That I shared with you. Desktop is there. It's asking for privacy and all this thing, no? Privacy, man. This, yes. It's, I can, my screen is on. Everything, when I'm asking, it shares the screen. Desktop पे जा रहे, कल तो शेयर किया था, उस दिन हमने देखा था.
सर अगर आप ग्रीन बटन दबाएंगे ना, उसके बाद आप सिर्फ ब्लू बटन दबा दीजिएगा, देखो क्या होता है. प्रेस द ग्रीन बटन एंड द ब्लू बटन, दैट्स इट.
शेयर स्क्रीन ना?
यस, शेयर स्क्रीन ग्रीन बटन. उसके बाद डायरेक्टली ब्लू
बटन
बटन
फिर
दबा
allow Zoom to share your screen, open
Yes.
system preferences.
यस.
So basically privacy grant to system.
सर आप मैकबुक पे हो क्या सर?
हाँ.
सर मैकबुक थोड़ा सा कभी कभी दिक्कत करता है बिकॉज इट्स अ वेरी प्राइवेट नेटवर्क, तो अपनी कुछ भी चीजें बाहर नहीं निकाल सकते.
अभी क्या करें? 1 सेकंड, अभी इसमें प्राइवेसी में कैसे जाएंगे?
सर अभी ये थोड़ा सा दिक्कत होता है. करण कुछ हेल्प कर पाएगा? ये मैकबुक है
यार करण बताओ जरा इसमें यार.
सर आपने पावर पॉइंट पे बनाया है कि कीनोट में?
और पॉइंट पर मेरा खुला हुआ है यार.
सर ये परमिशन देना होगा आपको सर, वहाँ से जाकर.
परमिशन कैसे देंगे इसमें?
हाँ.
मैं इस पे गया, डेस्कटॉप पे गया हूँ, मैं शेयर स्क्रीन आया, उसमें बोल रहा है कि ओपन सिस्टम प्रेफरेंसेस, तो सिक्योरिटी एंड प्राइवेसी टू ग्रांट एक्सेस.
सर कोई जरूरी नहीं कि आप उसी को शेयर करें, आप डेस्कटॉप शेयर कर लीजिए. जो फर्स्ट वाला विंडो बना हुआ है ना, कोई जरूरी नहीं है कि आप वीडियो पावर पॉइंट शेयर कीजिए. जो शेयर पे आप जब शेयर पे क्लिक कर रहे हैं,
हाँ,
तो आप पहला विंडो चूज कर लीजिए.
वही कर रहा हूँ ना, डेस्कटॉप 1 लिखा हुआ है.
हाँ, और पावर पॉइंट दिखाई दे रहा है क्या वहाँ पे?
ना उसमें नहीं. हाँ, पावर पॉइंट.
हाँ, आप डायरेक्टली पावर पॉइंट पे क्लिक कर दीजिए. अब करिए सर.
फिर से वही मांग रहा है.
सर वो मांगेगा सर.
मांगता रहेगा सर जब तक आप
रुको, मैं फिर
में जाके अलाउ नहीं करेंगे.
आईफोन से करूं?
सर एक छोटा सा, या तो आप हमें ईमेल कर दो, फिर हम आपको प्रेजेंट कर देंगे.
मैं अभी आपको मेल कर देता हूँ. बताओ संदीप, मैंने तुमको मेल किया है.
डॉक्टर संदीप.
सर आप लिखिए.
हाँ भेजो, बताओ जरा.
सर करण कुमार, KARN.
करण
KARN.
करण
कुमार KUMAR. 4 times CCC. 4 times CCC.
CCC.
Yes.
CCC.
4 बार
4 बार सर. 4 बार CCC.
हाँ.
@gmail.com.
संदीप, आपको मैंने भेजा हुआ था मेल है.
Sandeep sir is muted.
Sandeep is mute.
Yes.
I am not able to open it.
Sandeep.
I am not able to open it, sir.
अच्छा, you're not able to open it. मैंने भेजा तो है. 1 second. I'll just. इसमें इसका प्राइवेसी का वो देखना पड़ेगा यार
सर।
या तो केबल
मिश्रा सर।
हाँ
सर मैकबुक आप यूज कर रहे हो, मैं गाइड करूं?
मैकबुक, हाँ उसको यार खोलना पड़ेगा।
सर नहीं, सुनिए सुनिए सुनिए, आपका बस जहां आप ओपन प्रेफरेंसेस आ रहा था ना,
1 सेकंड, हाँ
वहां तक पहुंचिए।
कौन सा शेयर में?
हाँ शेयर कीजिए, तो ओपन प्रेफरेंसेस बोल रहा है ना प्राइवेसी के लिए,
हाँ
वो ओपन प्रेफरेंसेस दबा दीजिए।
हाँ दबा दिया।
दबा दिया तो एक नया विंडो खुलेगा जिसके अंदर आपको दिखेगा एक जूम का नाम लिख के साइड में एक चेक बॉक्स दिखेगा।
1 सेकंड,
नया एक विंडो खुला ना प्रेफरेंसेस का।
हाँ हाँ बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
उसमें राइट साइड पे एक लिस्ट होगा जिसके अंदर आपका जूम लिखा होगा और साइड में
हाँ,
चेक
हाँ।
बॉक्स होगा। करेक्ट?
खुला, हाँ चेक
हाँ,
बुक।
वो जो चेक बॉक्स है आप चेक नहीं कर पाएंगे। लेफ्ट साइड बॉटम में एक लॉक है।
लॉक का
लेफ्ट साइड बॉटम में एक लॉक दिख रहा है आपको उसी विंडो पे?
हाँ लॉक दिख रहा है।
हाँ वो लॉक को दबाइए पहले।
हाँ
वो लॉक को दबाएंगे, वो आपका पासवर्ड मांगेगा या फिंगरप्रिंट मांगेगा। हो गया?
हाँ
अभी वो लॉक खुल गया।
हाँ
अभी आप जूम का जो चेक बॉक्स है उसको टिक कर दीजिए। जूम के बाजू में एक चेक बॉक्स है, उसको टिक कर दीजिए बस।
ओके
बस, और उस विंडो को क्लोज कर दीजिए। अभी फिर से यही चीज शेयर कीजिए, शेयर हो जाएगा।
क्विट एंड रीओपन ना?
हाँ सर।
लीव मीटिंग दोबारा बोल रहा है, लीव मीटिंग दोबारा ज्वाइन करना पड़ेगा।
हाँ दोबारा ज्वाइन करना पड़ेगा सर।
Okay, till the time sir joins, is Dr. Anirudh still there?
So we will also have to try and keep it on time. Just
Yeah.
yeah.
10 minutes only.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I'm there.
Yeah.
करण, जब डॉक्टर वापस आ जाएंगे ना, उनका 10 मिनट्स कर देना, ठीक है?
We have time till 2:25, I think.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The next chief instructor is also coming. Just confirm. Just got off on the call.
Okay, fine.
हो गया?
Yeah, it's come.
Yes, sir.
We can see it now.
Perfect, sir. Perfect.
Thank you. Sorry and sorry for this faux pas. Anyhow, 1 second.
So you're seen, you're audible. You can get started.
Yeah. It's so I'll be discussing about the management of post-acute trauma. Why it's actually important to study ocular trauma because it's a very common occurrence. The primary responder is the one who gives the maximum output, the visual acuity. Timely intervention can drastically change the end results. Diagnosis is clinical. Therapy can be started without elaborate investigations. And we all know the medico-legal aspect of it, that a trauma, there has to be a medico-legal documentation, especially in armed forces. We have to document the injury, and later on, the person can claim the disability because if it is occurred in a field condition. Initial poor management can lead to a downward spiral trend. So we all know that saving life before limb, the basic management principle of ocular trauma is that you have to save life before limb. The best initial visual acuity, corrected visual acuity, is the guide to the severity. Pupil must be checked on arrival. Avoid further damage by using a gentle handling or a peribulbar anesthesia, infiltration anesthesia. A gentle ultrasound is of immense help. CT orbit along with brain imaging can give a useful guide to the injury. Early treatment is mandatory, especially we have to start steroids, and early surgery helps to get a better visual outcome. Not all traumas in military hospitals are combat related. Here is a lady who had come with a fire jet injury in Holi. Ultrasound is of immense value. We can say this. Loss of convexity can be a useful pointer towards the open or closed scope injury. Checking RAPD, especially for my younger colleague, it's very important how to check for it, and especially on arrival with an injury. If the media is clear, fundoscopy should be done and the cause of vision loss can be ascertained. All cases of trauma, optic nerve lesions have to be kept in mind, especially when there is an RPD present and you can see a small trauma over the brow, and the patient have to be immediately started with IV methylprednisolone. Various scenarios are present where we have to decide whether it is open or a closed lobe injury. Here is a case of a missing wound where a soldier who was hit by a cricket ball and presents with complete hyphema with a very high pressure. And we thought that is a case of a closed lobe injury. However, the patient after 7th, 8th day started having a sudden fall in IOP, and when explored, revealed to be a open globe injury. These are the various picture one must keep in mind, especially if you are thinking in terms of a closed globe injury. You can see a breach in the sclera, especially under the conjunctiva or a subconjunctival hemorrhage. So when do you explore these kind of occult injuries? When there is a subconjunctival hemorrhage which is extending to the fornix, a boggy subconjunctival hemorrhage, eye which is soft, inaccurate projection of rays and or PL negative. But I must say that even in case if there is a PL negative person who comes immediately after trauma, one must give a trial of treatment, because in these cases also sometimes you can get a useful vision. Ultrasound or CT scan, especially when there is a deformed globe. Scenario 2, regarding the prognostication of the vision. So there are various scenarios. In this case, if you see there is a subilum bleed, the classical clinical picture of subilum bleed is a white ring sign. You can see the white ring here, and you know that it's a case of a subilum bleed. In this case, usually this presented with a gross diminution of vision on presentation. However, when OCT was done in these cases, one saw a good ellipsoid zone, and later on the patient gained good visual recovery, and these are the very good prognostic signs. However, in other scenario, when the patient presented with a subretinal bleed, the prognosis is not very good. It must be all these subretinal bleeds must be removed within 7 to 10 days. As primary ophthalmologist, one can, at least in this scenario, one can just give air or a gas in the intravitreal cavity and do a little paracentesis and send to a tertiary care center or to a vitreoretinal center surgeon. Subretinal TPA is required in these cases along with air tamponade or a gas tamponade. There is no role of anti-VEGF in this case, and the patient has to be in prone position. All these cases should not, if you have given a gas or air, one should not transport them by air. This is a case where the patient present, if you see, you tend to miss these cases. The patient complained of a good vision was 6/6, but there was a central scotoma. So when OCT was done, the ellipsoid zone, there was a loss of ellipsoid zone in the perifoveal region. If you see this in this perifoveal region, the ellipsoid zone was lost. So these cases, they can have a dense central scotomas. And if this ellipsoid zone is lost in the subfoveal region, the vision is very poor. If you see this presentation, if you see the fundus picture, you will see it's a grossly normal fundus, and sometimes these patients are labeled as maligulars. So before labeling anybody as maligulars, one must do an OCT. If you see this OCT, there is a loss of the ellipsoid zone in the subfoveal region, and these cases are not likely to gain a useful vision. In other cases of post-traumatic purchase retinopathy, one must differentiate. You get this kind of picture in a polytrauma, and you must differentiate it from any arterial occlusion. The prognosis is poor in these cases, and one can give an initial trial of systemic steroids. Post-trauma can also present with various forms of occlusions, the retinal occlusions. So it could be a CRAO, BRAO, or even the venous occlusions. This case has a unique case of a hemicentral retinal artery occlusion. The field loss was predominant with a vision of 6/9, and all these cases, embolic cause must be worked up, especially the carotids, to rule out any focus of embolus. one can have a traumatic chorioretinopathy. Initially, though, maybe you may not be able to find out a chorioretinopathy, but if there is a subretinal hemorrhage along with that, or when the patient comes little later, you can have a scarring, and if the fovea is involved, the vision is definitely affected. You can have a secondary CNVM at a later date on these sites. Role of steroid, though, may be given initially, but it's doubtful. Now, next, what is the timing of surgery? It's very, very important to know when to intervene, early or late. So here's a case, a young soldier who had come from a nearby place from Meerut with a sudden drop in vision following trauma. And he complained of a curtain-like shadow in the left eye. He was seen and diagnosed to have a supratemporal dialysis with a macula of RD. And a buckling was done in this case, and the patient regained a 6/6 vision. So it's very important to reiterate that buckling can be very, very rewarding, especially in younger people and when there is a dialysis. Another scenario, a badminton injury with a racket. A young person comes with a vitreous hemorrhage and on ultrasound detected to have RD and subretinal bleed. Surgery done in the same day and a good visual recovery of 6/18. Here's a case of, we all see traumatic macular hole. So there's always a controversy. Then can you wait in a traumatic macular hole? Some say that you can wait up to 3 months. However, if the macular hole is large macular hole, or there is a subretinal bleed, one must immediately intervene. However, in case if the macular hole is small and the patient can be followed up with serial OCTs, one can wait and watch. And these holes, like this hole, which was 264 micron, closed just by observation. One can get a hemorrhagic cyst with RD. So this was a paper which was published as a case report by my colleague. But in these cases, one must do for cytology for medical legal purpose. So surgical ventures, more or less, as it was told by my colleague, that it's a specialty approach. It could enter segment surgeon is very, very important, because if the media is not clear, then you cannot see the retina and you cannot do any surgery. So in case keratoprosthesis or suture of the corneal lacerations is required before you venture out for the vitreoretinal surgery. This is a case of a globe rupture. If you see this, there was a globe rupture in the supratemporal quadrant with a retinal incarceration. So after doing a band buckle, a vitrectomy was, you see the retina, you see the cataract, the vision was, the media was very, very hazy because of the cataract, and because of the dense vitreous hemorrhage, the cataract surgery was also had to be carefully done. You can see a dense vitreous hemorrhage just behind the IOL, and carefully you have to clear the media and remove all the vitreous hemorrhage. One has to be very, very careful in doing vitrectomy in these cases, because the vitreous is completely mixed with the blood and it is firmly adherent to the retina, and one must avoid making any iatrogenic break, because if you make large breaks, then it will be very difficult to the retina.
We have time. Please stop the time. We have time.
I'll just continue, please. Thank you. In this case, there's another case where the initial buckling did not settle the retina, and patient also had a subluxated cataract lens. So it was cataract surgery was done with iris hook and CTR ring was implanted. IOL was implanted, and you can see the various PVR changes in the retina, and they have to be carefully removed, and a gas was implanted, and the patient had a good set retina, which was very well settled. Another case of a GRT in young, this patient had this boy had come from nearby place with a history of trauma, and there was a GRT. So in these cases, invariably one has to do a lensectomy, because you have to go closer to the base and shave the entire vitreous. One has to be very, very careful, because you tend to have a very high failure rate in these cases. So after doing a meticulous vitrectomy, and we do a silicon oil PFCL direct exchange and after 360-degree laser. So the take-home message is that suspect posterior segment trauma when the fundus is not visualized. Systemic management is very, very crucial, as we say that saving the life and limb before going further. Invariably, these patients require general anesthesia. Systemic steroids are mandatory in these cases. A careful ocular ultrasound and NCCT is must if there is no fundus view. One has to manage the intersegment well, and it's a multidisciplinary approach. Timing of this surgery has to be very, very important, and one should be ready to face challenges on table. So, I sum it up now that in armed forces, we have hospitals spread across all over the country, and we have to work in a very, very difficult terrain and a difficult environment. So it's very important for the first responders to do the basic treatment and follow the principle of saving life before limb. Multi-organ trauma is commonly seen in these cases, and hence multidisciplinary approach. In armed forces, the telemedicine has totally revolutionized the treatment, and a prompt casual evacuation from these difficult terrains has helped in a good recovery, and we have been able to salvage various advanced case of trauma with a good visual recovery. I must also put on record that my colleague Anirudh has been presenting his paper from the China border. So this is what is armed forces is about, that, you know, sitting from all over country and still able to connect with each other. And we have a very strong bonding in our specialty, and we are able to tackle any situation with best of the facilities available at all centers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mishra sir. Just a brief, anybody has any questions? Just take few questions. We have time, around 5 minutes more. If none, I have a question. Can I have Dr. Anirudh? He's around?
Yeah.
So he's got a lot of experience with air evacuation. So what are the precautions you take before evacuating a multi-trauma or eye trauma patient before air evacuation? I think we should all do that.
Yeah, air evacuation actually underwent a lot of change in the last year and a half, basically because of the COVID. So the moment, you know, you plan for an air evacuation, the first thing that you have to ensure is that you inform the pilots who are coming for the evacuation of your casualty that this is a particular trauma case or whatever, and you, in general, obviously you will take precautions and assume that particular patient to be positive unless proved otherwise. So you take all due precautions. So in that case, so in case a larger chopper is coming to evacuate a patient, or the patient is being evacuated by a fixed wing aircraft, all the crew members generally take full precaution, in the sense they will be wearing either a PP kit or at least using a N95 mask. That is the first thing that is followed now after all these new pandemic thing. So that is the first thing. The second is, most of the times with polytrauma patients, there may be ocular injuries, orbital trauma, facial trauma, which is there, and patient may require simultaneously oxygen mask. So obviously you have to take that into consideration, and in such cases you cannot put a mask on the patient, a separate kind of a N95 mask, and whatever mask that you're using to give oxygen, that particular mask is the only thing which is used. Any attendant who accompanies the patient obviously has to be wearing either a PP kit with an N95 mask. So these are the first things which have added on to the usually existing procedures for evacuating a ocular trauma patient or any polytrauma patient. So that is the basic thing. Second is, in case aircraft is coming for evacuating a patient who's having a polytrauma and you also suspect a ocular trauma, in such cases you have to, as a medical officer, you have to first verify what kind of aircraft is it, or what kind of a helicopter is it, because there are in particular high altitudes there are helicopters which obviously cannot take a lying patient. They are smaller aircrafts, they have a limitation So that is also there. So you have to take that into consideration. Then there are weather conditions. So sometimes, the weather is such because of which the chopper cannot land at a particular altitude. And because of that, you may have to evacuate patient partly through the land route also. So all these things have to be taken into consideration. So when you are evacuating, again, the same principle, the ABC has to be followed, the airway, breathing and circulation. So a medical officer or a doctor who's the first responder who's examining a case has to evaluate that in case he goes by air, he may take around 1 hour or maybe 30 minutes. But if he goes by land, he may take around 6 hours, 8 hours, or even longer. So is it going to compromise on his general status? That is the ABC, that is the airway, breathing, circulation. So all those parameters are paramount. So that is one. And obviously, once all those things are considered and a trauma patient is evacuated, then the next thing is you see is that in case you have, let's say there is a ocular trauma and there is an obvious trauma over the eye, you have to either give a eye shield, or in case you don't have eye shield, because that may be the case in most of the cases, because these trauma cases, unlike in general planes, when such kind of trauma does happen, what does happen is that you may not have the eye shield, so you have to fashion a eye shield, put an eye shield on the eyeball to protect it during the transit. So these are some basic peculiarities which are generally different from what generally happens in evacuation from a plane area.
Thank you so much. We've been told that our times are up. So I thank all my panelists, Dr. Amit, Dr. Anirudh, Dr. Sanjay Mishra, Dr. Vijay, lucid presentations, and I thank AIOS and ARC again for this opportunity for us. Thank you so much. And thank you for coordinating so well.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.